You guys hear the sound of that? That's the sound of my wallet crying. Okay, so now that we have kind of the information now for all these units, I'll just talk about them a little bit as the usual, just pre-analysis before testing, what kind of my expectations are, and let's get right into it. So Asuka, she is an assault rifle, and I think the first thing that people would immediately imagine is that she has a ammo capacity, so they would think that she would be similar to Scarlet, that ammo has 20 and Asuka has 20. So as an assault rifle, that's really the main direct conversion on that one. And the main difference also is that Asuka has 18% attack only, meanwhile Scarlet has 27%. And like if you think about it just from that, and then also this skill 1 is only 96%, meanwhile Scarlet has about 115% or something around that. And so now you're gonna be looking at it like, wait, that's she seems like a little bit inferior to Scarlet, and that's only if we kind of look into it. And to be fair, for a lot of the PvE situations, Scarlet's primary relevance is just skill 1. Like her burst, it doesn't do a lot of damage in terms of PvE situation. It's a pretty low multiplier because it is good for AoE, right? And that's what it makes up for. And then the skill 2, she has to be attacked, which we really try to avoid in PvE situations. So Asuka is now different in that regards because her skill 2 and burst actually will start being relevant, and so that's probably why they kind of nerfed her a little bit. Now she's a burst 3 attacker and assault rifle, and if I have to kind of sum it up, she is a bit more DPS and a little bit of fire support. And the support comes in the skill 2, which has damage attacking to core, which affects only the fire code allies. So that's really good because, however, something to keep in mind is like during full burst, that multiplier on full burst is additive with the attacking to core, and there's just other things that are additive to the core damage bonus, but it's still a bonus nonetheless. And then skill 2 has the shield status and damage a strong element. I'll talk a little bit about this, but basically she has to be in shield. So units that's like Tia, which kind of give the shield whenever she is bursting. Crown is another example where she gives shields and affects the allies. Then Asuka will get the damage as strong elements. So in likely the situation where fire advantage, we're likely gonna have to put her either in the Tia team or like the Crown team. That's kind of like the primary ones. Now there are other units that do provide shield, but then something to keep in mind also, there are some units also that just don't, that has shield effect, and it seems like it affects all allies, but in reality they're just casting the shield to themselves. Some example would be Blanc and Poli, which it seems like it guards everybody, but they cast the shield to themselves, and it's not gonna affect Asuka, and that's something that's has happened already with like Naga, for example. We've identified this, so so for Asuka, that's just there's just gonna be specific units that's gonna have this shield status, and it's something that is when you're just strong on the strong element. And then the next one is the burst, which is the pierce attack damage. And here, so there's this part where it says recovery takes effect on skill 1. It gives her attack, and that can pretty much be a permanent uptime because it's at 25 seconds. And when she's bursting, there's this part which is the recovers 3% attack damage, and so that will actually give her self healing, and that will trigger the attack bonus. And so that will pretty much just allow it to have almost like pretty much a permanent uptime because you're bursting every between between 12 to 15 seconds every time, right? So you'll eventually get to that point where you're gonna burst again, and you're gonna refresh this just from herself, as long as she's the one bursting. Another thing that that's really big on this is the attack damage buff, which is 150%. Now that means that it might kind of start restricting some things for, like, in terms of team building, because now it might end up there's like the illusion on it, right? So technically with Tia and Crown, they both provide attack damage, so it does kind of dilute a little bit of like what the damage is, but that's during her burst, so that's just one part. But you know, there's other times where Tia Naga or Tia's bursting every 20 seconds, right? And same with Crown, she's bursting and providing attack damage also every 20 seconds. So on the times when she's not bursting, Asuka's not bursting. Yeah, that's. And then another thing is the hit rate, which is like 101%, which basically pretty much like will make it close to almost a machine gun. That's pretty much what it will do in terms of accuracy, so that's actually really good. I believe there might be a little bit of extra hit rate that you have to add in your overload to make it like much more laser precision, but I think it's pretty much close to just very high accuracy that you probably don't need it when she's bursting anyway. So that's Asuka. Now the other question that other people might have is like, will she work with Rei? Because Rei, I'm gonna jump a little bit on this one, is Rei has a shield that creates for all fire code allies, and then it provides attack damage. The downside here is only when she's bursting, only when Rei is bursting, so it's not really gonna work, or the buff is not gonna trigger. So skill 2, it's whenever you're entering full burst, as long as you're in shield status, so that's okay, right? But this is only gonna happen, the shield from Rei is only gonna happen when she is bursting. So there's a little bit of like not good synergy between the two of them in terms of like taking advantage of the shield status for Asuka, and especially with the damage of strong element. I could see them being partnered when it's off on off like element, but in elemental advantage there's likely a chance that we are actually gonna separate them out. Now to talk about a little bit of Rei, to sum it up, I would say that Rei is more of a support, half DPS. And the thing is, so let's talk about her DPS capability, and let's bring the bad news. So first things first is she's a machine gun fire burst 3. However, she only has a 5.57 attack multiplier on her weapon, and this 5.57, in case you guys don't know, Summer Neon is 5.57, Guillotine is 5.57, Modernia is 7.71, Ludmilla, okay, that's the wrong one, Ludmilla. It's just, Ludmilla, okay, this one. Ludmilla is 5.86. So as you can see here, she is on the lower end in terms of the machine gun, and same with Crown, she's actually also 5.57. Now obviously compared to Crown, she has an advantage on the typing that she's an attacker, so that kind of puts her above Crown. But so it will be similar to like Guillotine and Neon, but Guillotine, one of the reasons why she has good damage is that she gets a ridiculous amount of attack percentage, but even then, like, it's not really always like high value, right? Because sometimes we have to heal, and so we kind of have to play around with Guillotine's HP if unless we have like another unit that can essentially taunt for Guillotine. So in terms of just like the the weapon type, it's kind of down. Now the question is, does she make it up with her skills? And the skills is, well, once she gets a pretty much a permanent uptime on the bonus on elemental, which is a 30% bonus, and this 100 normal attacks, that is every 1 2/3 of a second, almost 2 seconds basically. So you can pretty much have like a permanent uptime on it, because this damage, a strong element, is 3%. And then this one affects the enemy within attack range nearest to the crosshair. That one's kind of pretty standard, but that should, the thing is, it's 100 normal attacks and it's 112% damage only. So every almost 2 seconds, 1 2/3 of a second, you're getting additional 112%. To put it to perspective, Ludmilla actually only needs 1 second, which is 60 normal attacks, because machine gun 60 frames per second, bullets per second. She's dealing additional attack damage as 158, and also she has additional effect of damage taken. So it's just to put it to perspective that Ludmilla kind of based on just a skill 1 alone, as a support unit, she will come out on top. And Ludmilla will be better in situations where she is not elemental advantage. But for Rei, I guess like maybe that elemental advantage will kind of offset it a little bit, but that really puts her into very limited team composition, and also the enemies that we're gonna plan to use her. And the next thing is the damage to shield on Rei, which I kind of forgot to talk about it, but Asuka also has this damage dealt to shield, but this damage dealt to shield is, as I mentioned before, it's like Tia, Crown, and perhaps like those ruptures that have like the shield on, when they put in. So that seems to be gonna be the standard on it, on these collab units for Evangelion. And then the skill 2 following up to it would be the caster's attack bonus, and it affects all fire code allies, and it's whenever you're entering burst stage 3. And so that should be pretty much like an uptime every time you try to full burst. It's whenever you're going from burst 2 into burst stage 3. After you cast burst 2, basically this is when it will trigger. So this is 25% only, and it should be a relatively almost permanent uptime during full burst. So that's good. But it's 25% only, and that value is not very much in the grand scheme of things, especially for there's like gonna be some units that have like high attack buff for themselves. So that's something to consider in terms of which ones are gonna use. So like 2B is not gonna be taking advantage of this. Alice, whenever she's bursting, where majority of Alice's damage come in, right, like it does get a little bit diluted. The best one where Rei could be together, just looking at this particular one where she's buffing, is Modernia, and I'll talk about it after this burst, because this burst will affect all fire code allies. It gives shield, and she gives attack damage buff, but keep in mind she has to burst. So she gives attack damage buff to the team, so she has to burst. The thing is, a lot of the DPS, their burst 3 also. So one is she's eating up the burst 3's like slot, and 2, she a lot of those DPS that they're bursting, majority of their damage come from their burst. So she's eating up a crucial slot for someone else. if only this attack damage is like on skill 2 and like maybe they flip this out, I think she would definitely be a top tier in that situation. But because they put it on the burst, there's a lot of limitation on it. And basically the ones that are gonna be benefiting off it are units that have high multipliers on their own already. So I mean, actually Asuka is not bad too in that sense, because she also already have high attack here, so technically she will benefit here on the attack damage. But also other units that are just benefiting and doing a lot of damage without necessarily needing burst. And specifically, one of the bigger examples on this one would be Modernia, because Modernia, majority of her damage come from her just like basic attacking. And so what this means is like during her burst, half of the time, like Modernia's damage will be just primarily affected on it. So that's why I think that Ray would primarily be a partner with Modernia. Kind of makes sense, they're both machine gun. But to sum Ray up, it feels like she's like half support and half DPS. Her DPS is just not to the same level as the other. I would say even Modern. The main two machine guns, to be fair, that are DPS is primarily Modernia and Ludmilla. So, and if we just look at specifically those values, like Ray's number is just not gonna be there. But when it's damage to strong element, that might kind of offset a little bit. But yeah, I feel like it's gonna be hard right now with the current units to kind of slot her in. So we'll have to see. One other thing that I guess we could talk about is that she has a 990% AoE on her burst, and then she does provide shield. Some people might think it's like, oh, it might good for PvP, but again, another thing that makes her kind of bad for PvP is machine gun. Her machine gun typing. Typically PvPs, for PvP, machine gun is not generally advised because they hit a lot, they do a lot of bullets, which kind of is a downside for some units that are taking advantage when they're getting hit. So like Emma and Scarlet with Jackal combined with Jackal. So that kind of puts her down in terms of defense. But I guess like for offense, maybe there's a possibility on that. But yeah. So Ray kind of a little bit down in terms of the priority. Now let's talk about Mari. Jumping into Mari, this is the one that kind of made me, what the hell is happening here? These skills are the basic standard weapon types are 69% and nice ammo and reload. That's fine. The main thing is she's a support burst too, and she does give pierce damage and attack damage. And this is kind of huge because in particular it's the amount. She gives a cumulative of up to 82% in the damage category, attack damage category, because pierce damage is going to be additive to attack damage, so it'll be pretty much 82%. And I mean, just to give you an idea, right, Crown has attack damage of 36 plus 20%. So in situations of where she can proc that pierce damage consistently, which is like she only has to hit the core, unless there's other conditions, it doesn't seem like it, for the pierce damage in particular, you can have pretty much a permanent uptime on this pierce damage, and this attack damage is a consistent during whenever you're full bursting. So this is really, really huge because there are some units that don't really have like the attack damage multipliers, and so to give main example would be Red Hood, which is the probably the number one example on this one, and same with that is also Alice. So both Red Hood and Alice, the main thing about them is they don't have any attack damage multipliers, which makes it really good against these kind of old units, because these units don't have the attack. They have like high attack buff, right? So whenever Red Hood is bursting her burst 3, casting Red Wolf here, she's getting 71%, and then she's just doing the Red Wolf burst, and she doesn't have any attack damage bonus. And same thing with Alice, she doesn't have any attack damage bonus. So this kind of ends up being similar to, say, like other like Rosanna, Novel in particular, right? Like think Novel is giving 5 seconds of attack damage taken increase, and then for 60% or around that, and this one gets to 80%. So now it's gonna depend obviously in the team, kind of like the team compositions, but this is just to give a perspective that she is providing that attack damage that other units are not providing as much. Then on top of that, she also has caster's attack buff. Now the difference though is for this caster's attack buff is it's a cooldown time of 10 seconds, and then it's triggering every 10 seconds. So every, if you look at the timer, 250, 240, 230, like that, those timers, it will trigger the buff for 5 seconds, this 30% attack buff, and that will line up to, say, like Dala, that will line up to Yulha, and when you're doing Snow White and Yulha kind of timing, that will also kind of just line up that attack buff. Oh, and you just heard the S word that you guys probably are kind of a little bit worried about, but I mentioned. So yeah, you could see her in a Zwei Snow White Yulha team. That's something that is a possibility because just of the insane multipliers. Now that will kind of actually make that team relatively good slash decent in terms of neutral condition. And if it's elemental advantage, then you can just change Dala into Summer Helm, right? Well, anyways, so just to get, this is just to give a perspective. Now more and more units are getting attack damage kind of self buff, right? So I'm thinking like in the future units, now the question is like what kind of buffs are they getting? Because like for example, to give an example, is Asuka, is she's getting high attack buff here, and then she's also getting attack damage buff, and this attack damage buff whenever she's bursting is the 150%. So that is when she just kind of get diluted and this multiplier, but still even then it's a very high buff. It's 80% for any units that have pierce, and obviously there's like that requirement, oh, the boss has to have core, but even if there's no core, it's like 40%. And then if we look at, say, the units that are giving like damage taken increase, right? Summer Rosanna, for example, is gonna be is like 32%, and then Blanc is actually close to 39%. So Blanc is 39% in here. So she does, even by default, if the unit doesn't really have damage taken and there's no other units that are giving damage taken, then Mari by default can provide the same amount of buff that Blanc is providing, minus obvious, actually a little bit more because of the attack buff also actually. So yeah, that's why I think that Mari, out of all these three units, the one that I kind of noticed, and I think I'm more likely to pick is Mari. She does give Pierce attack damage support as burst too, and she's a bit more general slash any element usage. And any future units that is getting Pierce, she is gonna be a consideration for team building. So, yeah, right. And oh my God, I hate to say this, but I hope it's not gonna be like a rum situation, because I'm a little bit worried on this, because this is like too high of a value, and now I'm a little bit worried. What are you trying to cook on like anniversary now? Because but the one thing I could think of is maybe it will be a DPS in the anniversary, so maybe we should be fine on getting her, right? What are you cooking here, anyways? But yeah, and then Asuka, I would say she is more inclined to be more on the fire DPS side, but she does have a core bonus, slight core bonus for fire units. So that's why I would put her a little bit on the second position there. And then Ray is the one that's kind of a little bit difficult in terms of just the way we can team build on this. Now she can take advantage of that shield, maybe with her presence, maybe she can become like just the sole defensive unit. But for the most part, right, whenever we're doing solo raid, we're more reactive than proactive in terms of using our defensive capabilities. So like, unless it's crown, but crown you just kind of spam burst, right? But being on the defensive mode before getting hit is a little bit difficult. And then also it's only like 13%. I don't know how that will last in terms of like just the boss capabilities, boss damage. And then again, like I mentioned, also it's just the attack damage. She's eating up this attack damage whenever she's bursting. So the main one that where she can be really support are those units that doesn't have a lot of attack buff themselves, and they have like good multiplier. And really the main one right now that I can really see is just Modernia. So yeah, and her DPS capability, as I mentioned, is a little bit on the low side. Now finally, what do I think, like kind of just the teams, and I was just like playing around, right? And you can have like Litter Crown Alice with Asuka and Modernia with just like the triple fire team, or you can use Naga with Crown as well to get that more uptime on Crown's buff, and then Alice and Asuka. And this is primarily, I would say, probably gonna be in the team where fire advantage is going to be. And I think that this might be one of the rare occasions where we might have to move out Scarlet Black Shadow, and we might have to put Scarlet Black Shadow with the bunnies or Tia Naga, and together with either Maxwell or Red Hood. The last time when I was testing things, Scarlet Black Shadow with Alice gets about 25% damage increase, and Scarlet Black Shadow with Maxwell gets about 15% damage increase. So I mean, it's gonna depend also for the rest of the teammates, but that was kind of like the general damage increase that Maxwell was providing. So it's not like you're losing too much when you do switch Scarlet Black Shadow from Alice into Maxwell. But now the question is like, do you want to take advantage also of like the other buffs that, for example, Tia Naga is providing? So that's why when we might have to put Red Hood in there. The alternatives obviously is you could, if you did end up like using like Crown Naga, Tia's Zwei is gonna be an option for those people that did pull Zwei. I understand though that Zwei is kind of like an expensive unit right now. Not a lot of people do have that, but so Tia's Zwei is gonna be an opening, and Snow White with Yule coming in clutch here. We might have a Snow White team this solar raid, and then there's also the Zwei Mari team. And for this team, I might wonder who's the defensive unit, Zwei and Mari. Zwei has a cover recovery, and so assuming that we can cover things, then Snow White with Zwei is probably enough to kind of like survive on that. But the alternative is, if we're using Mari, you can use Miranda as the fire option, and then we're gonna have Helm. Yeah. Now there's other things too. You know, you can still have the Scarlet Back Shadow with Alice combo if we really want to, and then maybe decide Crown with Asuka, and then perhaps with using Privity. I'm a little hesitant to use Modernia with Asuka in this team because there's not going to be a fast charger with it. And so that's why I was like, okay, maybe I'll just use Maxwell in it. But with Crown and Privity, it will kind of alleviate a little bit of the ammo issue with Asuka. That's just how one of the good things about it. But I mean, we can also just kind of remove Privity. That's also okay, and just put Maxwell and Modernia. That's another option also. It should be okay. The downside only is, I guess, I think you just need a little bit more ammo on your Asuka for that situation. Now the other combo teams: D Mari Red Hood, Mari Alice, Ray Modernia, and it's gonna be really flex on that. It's gonna depend on the boss mechanics, like, and then how much are we gonna, do we really need a healer? That kind of questions are gonna come up in terms of what are we gonna need? And then the final ones is you guys, the shotguns that I was thinking about, where you do end up just using like Tove with the bunnies, shotgun bunnies, or the standard one without the healer. I don't know how this one will work though, but again, it's gonna depend on the boss to boss situation for this. But yeah, it's a little bit kind of, how to sum it up here, I would say it's gonna be up and down in terms of my opinion on them. I'm a little bit more up on Asuka because she feels like she's gonna be a fire DPS that might be relevant, and she has a little bit of support capability, which is a little bit different from the other collab units that were DPS oriented. She has a little bit of buff damage increase, so she might end up just being a bit more relevant on fire advantage. Ray, I feel like she is just here, but like her full realization is not there yet. Either we're waiting for another DPS, but yeah, which DPS are the ones that does a lot of damage without necessarily bursting themselves? I think that's the main thing, and it has to be fire, right? I could see actually Trony, and that could be one thing too. But yeah. Anyways, moving on. Mari is, that's, like I mentioned before, she does have a little bit more future, it seems like, because it feels like she can support in a much more different ways. The only thing I'm really worried about in her is how can Shift Up manage to make her irrelevant. That's the only thing, because these are pretty huge numbers, so I guess we'll just have to see. And finally, Misato, yeah, you guys didn't just simp on her. Good lobby.